Yeah, it's that time of year again. It's the University of Georgia against the Florida Gators. Chris Hall here with you to talk a little bit about UGA and Florida. It is a big football game. Just a few weeks ago, you would think as you look forward to this game between Georgia and Florida, that Georgia would be a big favorite and it would be a snooze fest, at least in anticipation of the game. But things have kind of changed a little bit. Georgia, still playing wonderful, of course, undefeated. Georgia 7-0, the number one team in the country. But there's some lingering questions about Georgia, the structure of this team, and is this team is it built for the long haul, for the long run? And Florida's coming on a little bit. They've won the last two games that they've played and have looked better over the last two games. So tonight we're just going to talk a little bit about Georgia and Florida. We appreciate you joining us. And so let's talk about this game and get your comments on this game as we look forward to Georgia taking on Florida. If you have a comment, you have a question, you have a prediction for the game, zip in here and we'll talk a little bit about it. Georgia and Florida kickoff, of course, is this coming Saturday. It is the 3:30 game on CBS. You'll have the top-notch crew covering this game for CBS. And then, of course, it's Saturday, 3:30. The location is Jacksonville, Florida. And Georgia coming into the game. As of today, Georgia is a 14.5-point favorite over Florida for this coming Saturday's game. So, that's a little bit of the setup for the game. Georgia is 7-0 in the season. Georgia is undefeated, of course, obviously, in SEC play. Florida, on the other hand, is 5-2 on the season, and Florida is 3-1 in the conference. Now, Florida has lost to Utah in the first game of the season. Just looked terrible, in all honesty, against Utah, which Utah is a very good football team. And Florida rather, was on the road for that game. And then Florida lost to Kentucky. And so Florida is 5-2. The Gators won last week over South Carolina, 41-39. That was the last game that they played, of course. So Florida winning last week. Both teams, Georgia and Florida, now control their own destiny in the SEC East. Both teams have games against Missouri still on the schedule. Florida's already played Tennessee, and they took out Tennessee pretty handily. And so, it's kind of an interesting game. And for the next several games, we'll be answering a lot of questions about Georgia. And does Georgia have a chance? Does Georgia have a shot at, going to the SEC conference game and then going to the college football playoffs? So what do you think? Zip us a comment or a question or give us a prediction that you might have for this game coming up on Saturday. Last season, you might remember last season, it was a pretty tight game until about 5 minutes left to go in the first half. And then Georgia exploded for 3 touchdowns as the game was coming to a close in the first half. Georgia beat Florida last year, 40-22. Brock Bowers, of course, with the injury, with the surgery, he's out for the next several weeks. And there's possibility that he might come back as Georgia makes the college football playoffs, hopefully. But Brock Bowers had a big game against Florida last season. He had 5 receptions for 154 yards and a touchdown as Georgia beat Florida last season 40-22. Dejon Edwards, by the way, had a big game against Florida last season. Dejon had 12 carries, 106 yards, and 2 touchdowns. But it's a new season. It's another year in this storied rivalry game with Georgia and Florida. Defensively, Georgia is playing very, very well. It may not be up to the defense of Georgia statistically, may not be up to square with the last 2 defenses for the University of Georgia, but still the defensive unit for the University of Georgia this season is not a slouch. Georgia is allowing only 14 points a game, 4.4 yards per play. And Georgia is so far this season is holding opponents to 91.4 yards rushing per contest. So the Georgia defense playing quite well, and you got to think that this coming Saturday. Now, here's the mindset as we go into this game Saturday between Georgia and Florida. Florida, has some life. Florida has won their last two games. They're playing better offensively. Defensively, they're still a little suspect, but they're playing better offensively. And Florida has the disposition, they have the mindset that they are in a position to pull the upset off against Georgia on this coming Saturday. So, that's the mindset of Florida. Florida is feels like, hey, we got a shot against Georgia, and they're going to be sky high for this game. Now, Georgia, of course, obviously, Georgia is going to match the intensity. I anticipate a very good game coming up this coming Saturday between Georgia and Florida. Florida's got a quarterback. He's kind of progressed over the season. Graham Mertz is his name. He threw for over 400 yards and three touchdowns against South Carolina. Hey, Alberto, how you doing from Panama? Hey, we've got an international audience, as we talk about Georgia and Florida. But Graham Mertz threw for 423 yards against South Carolina on October 14th. Mertz played very well against South Carolina. Florida's got some receivers, pretty tough receivers. Ricky Pearsall has 44 catches on the season. Eugene Wilson III has 26 passes, and they're pretty good. Tied in, Arliss Boardingham has caught 18 passes. And so, Florida is pretty good as far as their receiving core is concerned. Joseph and Jody Paul Smith, how you doing, guys? From Fleming Island, Florida. Well, we got some Florida Bulldogs checking in with us. Everett Pearson from Camden County. Go Dogs, right? And now Georgia, of course, suffered a significant loss with the loss of Brock Bowers and that ankle injury. He had what is called a tightrope surgery. Now, I just had no idea. I never heard of such a surgery like that. I did some research on it. It's, anytime they do surgery, it's a major thing, and it may be a minor surgery on me, but if it's, done on, or a minor surgery, if it's done on you, if it's on me, then, it's major surgery. But I did some research. Brock, he's a tough guy. He loves this team, and he wants to play again this season. From what we understand, the mindset of Brock Bowers is, I'm going to do everything I can to rehab and get back with my teammates. And he anticipates, Brock Bowers is anticipating that Georgia's going to make a run for the SEC championship and get into the college football playoffs. And he wants to be there with his teammates. Hey, Jimbo, how you doing? Appreciate that. You're loving our comments, and we just love football and Georgia football in particular. Right now, Brock Bowers is out. Now, Oscar Delp is the sophomore tight end. He's going to be taking Brock's place. Obviously, there's going to be a shifting around a little bit of the offensive scheme with Brock Bowers not being able to play on Saturday. But I got to tell you, Oscar Delp is a very good athlete, and he's a good tight end. He's a sophomore. He's built a lot like Brock Bowers. He has a different kind of skill set than that Brock has, but he's got very good hands. He's a good blocker. He's progressed a lot. He's played significantly in this season. It's not like he hasn't played yet. Delp has 13 receptions so far this year, 160 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's a sophomore. He has experience, and he's a very good football player. And while you don't want to lose Brock Bowers, whom should be in the Heisman conversation, and, obviously with the injury, that's probably going to knock him out of any kind of consideration for the Heisman this year. But Oscar Delp is going to do very good. And Lucky is also one of the tight ends, I think, that may see some action on Saturday as well. So that's kind of the setup for the game on Saturday. Of course, the game is in Jacksonville, Florida. It's a neutral site game. Every year there's a discussion about, well, okay, why isn't this a home and home game? But, Jacksonville over the years has been a good location for this game. It feels like for Georgia more of an away game than I think it does for Florida. But people are used to it now. The programs are used to it now. Now they're going to do some renovations at TIAA Bank Stadium, the field in Jacksonville, in the coming years. So probably you will have in the coming years a home and home situation with this game. But for the next couple of seasons, it'll continue to be a game played in Jacksonville, Florida. So, what do you think? Now, we have a prediction. I have a prediction. I think Georgia's going to win this game 34 to 21. I think Florida's going to hang in there, make it tighter than Georgia really wants it to be. But I think in the end, Georgia has the better team, the better skill set, the better defense. Unless something really happens where Georgia kind of, has some turnovers and things like that, and Florida gets going. You know how momentum can be. I think Georgia's going to win this game in typical Georgia fashion for the season, and with the exception of the Kentucky game where Georgia really took it to Kentucky. Georgia's, has hung on and fought and struggled and has scrapped and scraped to win their games this season. And I think that's going to be the same thing with Georgia and Florida this coming Saturday. Now, Carson Beck is from Florida. It's kind of a homecoming game for him. Carson's been doing very well. Georgia fans were a little iffy about Carson Beck, but Carson has played very well this season. He's one of the top quarterbacks in the SEC. And Carson's doing very well. And I think Georgia's in good hands with Carson Beck. So that's kind of the setup for the game on Saturday. Now, on Saturday, we'll be with you pregame at halftime and then after the game, and we'll be talking about what's happening with the game. Now, in other kind of issues dealing with Georgia, Georgia continues to be the number one team in the country. Georgia now has been in the AP poll, the number one team in the country for 19 straight weeks. Going back, of course, obviously to last season. That is the third best in the history of the AP rankings. And so Georgia received 38 of 63 first place votes. Michigan gained a little bit and getting some first place votes in this week's AP poll, but Georgia continues to be in the AP poll, the number one team in the country, followed by Georgia's number one streak, by the way, started on October 9th, 2022. It's behind only a Miami streak of 21 weeks of number one from 2001 to 2002. And Southern California's 33 weeks in a row is number one from 2003 to 2005. So Georgia continues to be the number one team in the country in rankings. The top 10 for the AP poll. This is the AP poll. Now, the college football playoff poll, which is the big one, which is the poll that determines who goes to the college football playoffs. This year, of course, you continue to have the 4 teams that will make it. Next year, it expands to 12 teams. The college football playoff poll won't come out until a couple of weeks from now, or 2 or 3 or 4 weeks from now. But the AP poll is the poll. It's the coaches poll. And it's the poll that there's different kinds of polls, obviously, but it's the poll that people really kind of pay attention to this time of the year. Georgia continues to be number one, followed by Michigan, Ohio State, and Florida State. Those are the top 4 teams in the AP poll. And each one of those teams, by the way, received first place votes this past week. Georgia had 38 first place votes, Michigan 19, Ohio State had 3, and Florida State had 3. So that's your top 4. And then you have Washington 7-0, Oklahoma 7-0. Now those are the undefeated teams in the AP poll. And by the way, Air Force is number 19 in the top 25 of the AP poll, and Air Force is undefeated. They're 7-0 as well, that program. So the undefeated teams are Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Florida State, and Oklahoma. And then on down the line in the rankings, Air Force, which is 7-0. So after Oklahoma, you have Texas. 6-1. Oklahoma, of course, beating Texas in that big matchup. Then you have Oregon, Alabama number 9, Penn State number 10, followed by Oregon State, Ole Miss, Utah, Notre Dame, LSU, Missouri, North Carolina, Louisville. Then you have Air Force, Duke, Tennessee, Tulane, UCLA, USC, and James Madison coming in at number 25. James Madison also, by the way, undefeated, and they're in the top 25 in the AP poll. Now, just a recap of what Georgia has done so far this season, the results of Georgia's schedule so far this season. Just to recap, Georgia beat Tennessee Martin in the first game of the season, 48-7. Then they took out Ball State, 45-3. Georgia then on September 16th beat South Carolina at home 24-14. Georgia then beat UAB 49-21. Georgia then went to Auburn and beat Auburn 27-20, and that a tough game at Auburn. Georgia then really handed it to Kentucky on October the 7th in Athens, 51-13. Georgia then traveled to Nashville, and Vanderbilt put up a great game against Georgia, but Georgia won that game by a score of 37-20. So that's the result so far. Georgia is 7-0 on the season. Now you got Georgia at Florida, or Georgia and Florida. By the way, Florida is designated as the home team. Since it's a neutral site, Georgia was the home team last year. Florida is the home team this year. That'll be Saturday at 3:30. And and Georgia's schedule's going to be pretty tough for the next several weeks. This is really going to tell the tale about this Georgia team. You got Georgia, Florida on Saturday. Then you have Saturday, November the 4th, you have Georgia and Missouri. By the way, CBS will be telecasting that game at 3:30. That'll be a home game for Georgia. Then you have Georgia and Ole Miss November the 11th. That'll be at 1 o'clock, I think, something like that. Hey, Roy, how you doing? And Miss Priscilla, good to have you guys with us. Georgia, Florida, I think that's on ESPN, if I remember correctly. Or that may be a CBS game as well. Then you have Georgia and Tennessee. And then Georgia winds up the season with Georgia Tech. So these next games, obviously, they're going to tell the tale for Georgia this season. Georgia, Florida, Missouri at Georgia, Ole Miss at Georgia, and Georgia and Tennessee. Those are pretty tough games for Georgia. If Georgia negotiates that part of this schedule and goes undefeated, and then they'll play Georgia Tech the last game of the season, then Georgia will have done well if they continue to be undefeated and go through that gauntlet of games. People talk about Georgia's schedule being soft. Well, that ain't a soft schedule for Georgia over the next several weeks, and it's really going to tell the tale about what kind of team Georgia has. And hopefully we hope and we are pulling for Georgia to go undefeated through those games. Now, this coming Saturday, the SEC games this coming Saturday, you have South Carolina at Texas A&M. Jimbo Fisher, bless his heart. Jimbo might be on the hot seat. It's a big buyout, a huge buyout for Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, but that program is not producing the way the folks at Texas A&M want it to produce. And so I don't know. If South Carolina takes out Texas A&M on Saturday, Texas A&M may be looking for a coach on Monday. I just, that's the way it is. And South Carolina, is 2-5 on the season, but still a very good, potent football team. Almost took out Florida last week. Then, of course, obviously, now that game is at 12 o'clock on ESPN, South Carolina, Texas A&M. Then, obviously, you have Georgia and Florida on CBS. That'll be the 3:30 game. The 3:30 game on the SEC network will be Mississippi State and Auburn. And then the 7 o'clock game on ESPN will be number 1 Tennessee at Kentucky. Now, that's going to be a tough game for Tennessee. I tell you, Kentucky, even though Georgia handled Kentucky very well, and Kentucky has issues. That's a home game. It's at night. It's in Lexington. Kentucky's going to be gunning for that game to knock off Tennessee. So, that's going to be a tough game for Tennessee. And then the 7:30 game on the SEC network, you have Vanderbilt at Ole Miss, and you don't anticipate Ole Miss having any kind of problem with that game on on Saturday, Ole Miss and Vanderbilt. Now, there's really 5 college football games this coming Saturday that you want to keep your eye on, and these are going to be 5 significant games in college football. You have number 8 Oregon at number 13 Utah. That's a 3:30 game. It'll be on NBC. Oregon at Utah, that's a big game. If Oregon wins that game, then whoever wins that game is set up in the Pac-12 for the championship in the Pac-12, going to the championship game. And whoever wins that game stays in the hunt for being in the college football playoffs. Another significant game this coming Saturday, number 3, Ohio State at Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin's 5-2 on the year. That's a 7:30 p.m. game. And I think that's the ABC game, if I remember correctly. It may not be. That may be the Fox game. But you have Ohio State at Wisconsin, 7:30 on Saturday night. Ohio State traveling to Wisconsin. That's going to be a kind of a wild environment. And, Ohio State undefeated, 7-0, Wisconsin 5-2. It's a night game. It's a home game. Wisconsin looking to knock off Ohio State. That could be very interesting. Then you have Clemson at North Carolina State. That's at 2:00 on Saturday. Now, that'll be kind of an interesting game. Clemson 4-3 on the year. North Carolina State 4-3 on the year. Clemson traveling to North Carolina State. The Clemson program kind of falling off. That is kind of interesting. That's a 2:00 game on the CW network. The CW network has picked up ACC games. And you say, what in the world is the CW network? Well, yeah, Dabo Swinney was asking the same thing this week. He said, seriously, we're on the CW network. A lot of people can't even get that. So, but anyway, that'll be an interesting game. Clemson at North Carolina. Another interesting game on Saturday is number 6, Oklahoma, undefeated at Kansas State. Or at Kansas, rather. I'm sorry, at Kansas. Kansas is 5-2 on the season. Oklahoma, man, they barely got by Central Florida this last Saturday, winning in last second fashion against Central Florida. So you got number 6 Oklahoma at Kansas. That game last year was that Oklahoma Kansas game last year, in which Kansas won that game at Oklahoma. It was a barn burner. It was like 52-48, some kind of ridiculous score. So that's going to be a very interesting game to watch this coming Saturday. Then you have Georgia at Florida. Now that's this is a significant game. First place in the SEC East is on the line. One of the biggest games of the season. It'll tell a lot about Georgia. It also will tell a lot about Florida. And I got to tell you, Billy Napier is a good football coach. He's a good guy. You kind of sit here as a Georgia fan and you want to vilify, and kind of put down the other team. But I got to tell you, Billy Napier, his dad was a good coach. He's a good coach, and he's a good guy as well. And I think he's going to be successful at the University of Georgia, or Florida rather. And so Florida is going to be ready to go for this game. So it's going to be a tough game, but we anticipate Georgia winning this game on Saturday. And so now Florida's record, just to quickly run over what they have done this season. They lost that first game against Utah. That was a home game for Utah. That was a tough game. And Florida was defeated 24. What was that? 24-11. Then Florida beat McNeese State 49-7. Then Florida beat Tennessee. That was a home game for Florida, 29-16. Then Florida beat Charlotte 22-7. They lost to Kentucky. Tennessee lost to Kentucky 33-14. And then Florida beat Vanderbilt 38-14. And then last Saturday, Florida beat South Carolina at South Carolina 41-39. So Florida comes into this game 5-2 on the season. Now, just kind of a quick note about a national story. You know, Michigan. What in the world? What in the world is going on with Michigan? A report has come out today that an analyst guy, an offensive analyst guy, Michigan is being accused of stealing signs. Now, if you're playing in a game, you can, against your opponent, and if you can steal a sign from your opponent, that's not illegal. It is illegal, however, to send somebody out in a game in which your team is not participating in to sit in the stands and try to steal signs. And that's what Michigan is accused of doing. You can do it if you're playing against a team, and in the course of the game, you figure out what a sign may mean. You can do that, but you can't send a scout out to scout out a game prior to a game against an opponent that you're going to be playing in the future, but you're not playing on that day. Michigan did that, and apparently Michigan sent this guy out to 2 games against in which he scouted the University of Georgia and tried to steal signs from the University of Georgia. Didn't do Michigan a lot of good in that game in the playoffs a couple of years ago when Georgia played Michigan in the Orange Bowl. Georgia pretty well handled Michigan. But that's kind of a big, a big deal. A lot of people are talking about that. I don't know. We'll have to see where that's going. An investigation is underway by the NCAA. Again, you can steal signs. There's nothing wrong with that if you do it during the game in which you're playing an opponent. You just can't send somebody a scout out. You can't send a scout out, to try to steal signs in a game that your team is not participating in, if that makes sense. You can't do that. Some games, quickly, games this week. Number 6, Oklahoma at Kansas. That's on Fox at 12 noon. Indiana at Penn State. Penn State, bless their hearts. They just can't beat Michigan and Ohio State. Penn State just can't do it. And you got to kind of wonder how long, the folks at Penn State are going to put up with, their coach being able to beat everybody but Michigan and Ohio State. So, you got Florida State at Wake Forest. That's a 12:00 game on ESPN. South Carolina at Texas A&M. That's a 12:00 game on ESPN. Then you got Clemson and North Carolina State. That's a 2:00 game on the CW network. Yeah, I know. Then you got BYU at number 7, Texas. The Texas quarterback, by the way, Ewers, is injured and he's out for the next few weeks. Now it's not Arch Manning that's going to be taking his place. It's their I forget his name, their second string quarterback, which is a highly touted quarterback, by the way. I think Texas will be all right. Then you have number 8 Oregon at number 13 Utah. That's a big game, 3:30 game on Fox. You have Pitt at number 14 Notre Dame. You never know. Pitt gives Notre Dame fits sometimes when they play these games. Then you have an interesting game. Number 20, Duke. Duke was very impressive against Florida State for a while in that game last week. You have Duke at number 18, Louisville at 3:30 on ESPN. That should be a good game. Virginia at Miami of Florida. Mississippi State and Auburn. Number 5, Washington. Excuse me. Let me get a swig. Excuse me. Yeah, we have, excuse me, my goodness. Fits with our sinuses. What? Yeah, we're going to have to end it there. Anyway, join us this Saturday. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Join us this Saturday for Georgia and Florida. I'm sorry. All of a sudden, sinuses have invaded us here. But Georgia, Florida, this coming Saturday. What? Yeah, I think it's coming back. So I think I'll be all right. Anyway, Mississippi State and Auburn. I'm sorry about that. It just, my sinuses kind of got me there for a moment. Number 5, Washington at Stanford. At number 1, Tennessee, Kentucky. That'll be an interesting game. Number 19, Air Force at Colorado State. Yeah, I know. Sometimes you have to play injured. Sometimes you have to broadcast injured. There you go. You got to fight through it. Number 19, Air Force at Colorado State. Number 3, Ohio State at Wisconsin. Vanderbilt at number 12, Ole Miss this coming Saturday. Yeah, I'm all right, Jimbo. I appreciate it, man. Sinuses, this yellow stuff, the screen stuff on the side of the road. All of that, it kind of gets to me sometimes, and it's late in the day, and it's gotten to me. Let's see, Colorado at number 23, UCLA on ABC. There's some controversy about that, about why in the world Colorado and UCLA has the prime time game on ABC and not that Oregon Utah game. So controversy about that. Number 11, Oregon State and Arizona. So there you go. Well, thank you for praying for me. And I got through that. The goldenrod and all of that stuff has been giving me fits. But hey, that's going to, sometimes you got to broadcast injured. You got to fight through it. Put some duct tape on it and keep going, right? So we got through that. All right, guys, that's going to wrap it up for us as we preview the Georgia Florida game this coming Saturday and other games as well. Thank you for joining us tonight. We'll be back with you on Saturday. We'll have a pregame show right before the Georgia-Florida game. We'll do a halftime thing, and then we'll wrap it up after Georgia wins that game on this coming Saturday. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back with you on Saturday. Until then.